Mother cat got killed in a road accident. She left behind 4 crying kittens. Carman don't know that this incident will change his life forever. Put your headphones on, lean back, and let me take you through it. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, shimmering faintly under the dull gray sky. It was one of those afternoons when everything seemed heavier than usual. The clouds, the air, even the people. For the stray orange tabby, it was the day her life would change forever. She had been surviving in the small wooded area next to the highway for weeks, scavenging scraps of food and dodging predators. Her 4 kittens, barely old enough to open their eyes, were hidden in a hollow under a fallen tree. The mother cat, lean and wiry, knew the dangers of the highway. She had watched others, foxes, raccoons, and even other stray cats, attempt to cross and fail. But hunger gnawed at her, and her kittens needed more than the meager offerings she could find nearby. She looked back at her kittens, who were mewing softly, their tiny voices drowned out by the roar of the highway. They were following her instinctively, their little bodies trembling as they stumbled over uneven ground. The mother cat paused, her tail twitching nervously, and let out a low chirp to call them back. She needed to find food, but taking them across the highway felt like gambling with their lives. A few hundred yards away, Daniel Peterson was stuck in traffic, gripping the steering wheel of his old sedan. The day had been unkind to him. Work had been a nightmare, and his personal life was unraveling at the seams. He glanced at the clock on his dashboard and sighed. Another hour of this, he muttered under his breath. The phone on the passenger seat buzzed. He glanced at it briefly. His sister, probably calling to yell at him again about their father's estate. Daniel didn't pick up. He was too tired for another argument. All he wanted was to get home, microwave something vaguely edible, and collapse onto the couch. As the traffic started to move, Daniel pressed on the gas and followed the flow of cars. The monotonous drive offered little distraction from his thoughts, which swirled like the darkening sky above. Back by the edge of the highway, the mother cat made her decision. She stepped onto the road, her body low and cautious, ears flicking at every sound. Her kittens followed hesitantly, their tiny paws patting against the cold, unforgiving asphalt. She paused at the center line, looking back at her babies, and chirped again, a soft, encouraging sound meant to guide them. Suddenly, the roar of an engine grew louder. A silver sedan rounded the bend, moving faster than it should have been. The driver, a young man in a suit, was talking animatedly on his phone, oblivious to the road ahead. The mother cat froze, her instincts screaming at her to run, but her kittens were too slow. She darted back toward them, nudging them forward with desperate urgency. The sedan's tires screeched, but it was too late. The car clipped her as she pushed her smallest kitten out of the way. The sound of the impact was small compared to the chaos of the highway, but it was enough to send a ripple through the air. The mother cat collapsed onto the asphalt, her body still, her amber eyes half open as if caught between life and death. Daniel saw the scene unfold in an instant. The flash of orange, the blur of movement, the car speeding away without stopping. His heart jumped into his throat as he hit the brakes hard. His car skidded to a stop just a few feet from the lifeless form on the road. "What the hell?" he muttered, unbuckling his seatbelt and stepping out of the car. Other drivers honked their horns as they swerved around his vehicle, some yelling obscenities out their windows. Daniel ignored them, his focus on the tiny cluster of kittens huddled around the motionless body of their mother. A woman who had been jogging on the path next to the highway rushed over. She was in her mid-30s with curly hair tied back in a messy ponytail. Her face was pale as she took in the scene. "Are they okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Daniel shook his head, kneeling next to the mother cat. "She's gone," he said quietly, his voice tight with emotion. He looked at the kittens, who were mewling desperately, nudging their mother with their tiny noses. "But the babies, they're alive." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The woman knelt beside Daniel, her hand covering her mouth. "Someone should call animal control," she said finally, though her tone was uncertain. Daniel shook his head. "By the time they get here, who knows what could happen to these little guys? I'll take them." The woman looked at him, her eyes searching his face for something. Sincerity, perhaps, or competence. Are you sure? That's a big responsibility. Daniel nodded, though he wasn't sure why. I can't just leave them here, he said firmly. He reached out to pick up one of the kittens, a tiny gray and white fluff ball, who immediately tried to wriggle out of his hands. Here, the woman said, pulling off her jacket. She handed it to Daniel, who used it to gently gather the kittens into a makeshift bundle. As he stood up, cradling the squirming bundle against his chest, the woman touched his arm. You're doing a good thing, she said softly. My name's Mia, by the way. Daniel, he replied. He glanced down at the kittens, who had quieted slightly, their tiny bodies warm against his. Thanks for helping. Mia smiled faintly. Good luck, Daniel. They're going to need you. Back in his car, Daniel set the kittens on the passenger seat and stared at them for a long moment. Their mother's lifeless body was still on the road, cars swerving around it without a second thought. Guilt and sadness weighed heavily on his chest. I don't know what I'm doing, he admitted aloud, glancing at the kittens. They stared back at him with wide, frightened eyes. With a sigh, he started the car. Okay, little ones, he said, his voice softening. Let's get you home. The drive back to Daniel's small apartment was uneventful in the grand sense of things, but inside the car, it felt like chaos. The kittens, still bundled in Mia's jacket, had finally begun to stir. Their tiny mews filled the cabin, each cry tugging at Daniel's heart. He glanced at them nervously at a red light, unsure of what to do next. Okay, guys. Kittens, whatever you're called. I don't exactly have a plan here, he muttered, gripping the steering wheel. I've never had pets before, not even a goldfish. One of the kittens, a bold little black one with white paws, wriggled out of the jacket and began crawling across the passenger seat. Daniel swerved slightly, panicked. Hey, no, 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 you stay put, he exclaimed, one hand darting out to gently guide the kitten back to the bundle. The kitten, unimpressed, let out a defiant squeak. Daniel sighed. This is going to be a disaster. By the time he pulled into the parking lot of his apartment complex, Daniel's nerves were shot. He looked down at the kittens, who were now curled up together in a small pile, finally quiet. For a moment, he just sat there, staring at them. You guys really have no idea what just happened, do you? He murmured. Your mom, he trailed off, his throat tightening. Shaking his head, he grabbed the bundle and stepped out of the car. The gray clouds above had thickened, threatening rain. Daniel hurried across the parking lot and into the building, nodding briefly to Mrs. Ramirez, his elderly neighbor, who was watering the potted plants outside her door. What's that you've got there, Danny? She asked, her voice sharp but curious. Kittens, Daniel replied shortly, not stopping. Mrs. Ramirez's eyes widened. Kittens? Since when do you like animals? I don't, he muttered under his breath, fumbling for his keys. Long story. He managed to get inside before she could ask any more questions. His apartment was small and cluttered, a reflection of his life. The living room doubled as a workspace, with papers and files scattered across the coffee table. The kitchen sink was full of dishes and a half-eaten sandwich sat forgotten on the counter. Daniel placed the jacket on the couch and carefully unwrapped it. The kittens blinked up at him, their tiny faces full of trust and innocence. Welcome to... Well, this, he said, gesturing around the room. It's not much, but it's better than the highway. One of the kittens, the bold black and white one, stumbled forward and began exploring the couch, sniffing at the cushions. Another, a fluffy orange tabby, clung to the jacket and looked up at Daniel with wide, tearful eyes. Great, Daniel muttered. You're cute. That's going to make this harder. The next few hours were a crash course in kitten care. Daniel had no idea what he was doing, but he tried. He rummaged through his fridge and pantry, hoping to find something suitable for them to eat, but came up empty. Finally, he remembered the small convenience store down the street and decided to make a quick trip. He scooped the kittens into a cardboard box he found under the sink, lined it with an old towel, and placed it on the floor. Stay here, he instructed, as if they could understand him. One of the kittens, a gray one with a white stripe on its nose, let out a pitiful meow. Daniel hesitated, his resolve wavering. I'll be back, he promised. Don't go anywhere. At the store, Daniel found himself in unfamiliar territory. He stared blankly at the pet food aisle, overwhelmed by the sheer number of options. Wet food, dry food, kitten formula. It was all Greek to him. "Need help?" a cheerful voice asked. Daniel turned to see a young woman in a store uniform. She had bright red hair pulled into a braid and a name tag that read Leah. Yeah, Daniel admitted. I just, I found some kittens, and I have no idea what I'm supposed to buy." Leah's eyes lit up. "Kittens? That's so sweet of you. How old are they?" Daniel shrugged helplessly. "I don't know. Tiny. Like, they fit in my hand." "Oh, you're definitely going to need kitten formula," Leah said, grabbing a canister from the shelf. "And these bottles. They're too small for regular food right now." She handed him a few more items, explaining how to use each one. Daniel tried to keep up, but his head was spinning. "Thanks," he said finally. "This is a lot." Leah smiled. "You're doing a good thing. Those kittens are lucky you found them." Back at the apartment, the kittens were exactly where he'd left them, though the bold black and white one had managed to escape the box and was now batting at a loose thread on the couch. "Of course it's you," Daniel muttered, scooping the kitten up and placing it back with the others. "Troublemaker." Following Leah's instructions, he prepared a bottle of formula and sat cross-legged on the floor. The kittens, sensing food, perked up immediately. One by one, he fed them, their tiny mouths eagerly latching onto the bottle. "There you go," he murmured, his tone softening. "That's better, right?" For the first time that day, Daniel felt a flicker of something other than stress. The kittens were so small, so helpless, and yet so full of life. As they finished eating and began to doze off, curled together in a warm pile, he couldn't help but smile. "You guys are going to be a handful," he said quietly. "But I guess you're mine now." Later that evening, as Daniel cleaned up the kitchen and tried to make space for a makeshift kitten bed, there was a knock at the door. It was Mia, the woman from the highway. She was holding a bag of supplies, blankets, a small litter box, and a few toys. "I thought you might need these," she said, smiling shyly. Daniel blinked, surprised. "Wow, thanks. That's, really nice of you." Mia stepped inside, her eyes immediately landing on the kittens, who were now awake and playing on the floor. "They're adorable," she said, kneeling down to pet them. "Yeah, adorable and exhausting," Daniel replied. "I had no idea taking care of kittens was this much work." Mia laughed. "You'll get the hang of it, and if you ever need help, I'm just a call away." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Thanks. I might take you up on that." As the night wore on, Daniel sat on the couch, watching the kittens play. For the first time in a long time, his apartment didn't feel so empty. The weight of the day's events still lingered, but as he watched the little gray kitten tumble over its siblings, he felt a glimmer of hope. "Maybe this won't be so bad," he murmured. The kittens mewed in agreement, and Daniel smiled. The morning sun filtered through Daniel's apartment window, casting golden rays on the pile of kittens still nestled together in the makeshift bed he'd created for them. The old shoebox was lined with a soft towel, and the kittens had managed to burrow into it, their tiny bodies rising and falling with each breath. Daniel, sprawled on the couch, was awoken by a soft, high-pitched meow. He rubbed his face, trying to shake off the grogginess. His body ached from the unfamiliar experience of sleeping on the couch, but the sound of another meow snapped him out of his stupor. The bold black and white kitten had escaped the shoebox again and was now pawing at his leg. "You again, huh?" he said groggily. "You've got some nerve waking me up, little troublemaker." The kitten looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes, meowing insistently. All right, I'm up," he groaned, sitting upright. Daniel shuffled into the kitchen, gathering the supplies Leah had recommended. Preparing the kitten formula had become a routine by now, but he was still clumsy, spilling a little powder on the counter. As he mixed the formula, the black and white kitten followed him closely, weaving between his feet and nearly tripping him. "Geez, you're persistent," he muttered, scooping the kitten up and placing it back in the box with its siblings. One by one, he fed the kittens, their tiny mouths greedily latching onto the bottles. The gray kitten, now nicknamed Smokey for its soft, ash-colored fur, was the calmest and easiest to feed. The fluffy orange tabby, whom Daniel had started calling Pumpkin, wriggled impatiently, while the smallest of the bunch, a timid tortoiseshell named Daisy, needed the most coaxing. "You guys are a lot of work, you know that?" Daniel said, his tone half exasperated, half affectionate. The kittens responded with tiny squeaks, their round eyes blinking up at him. Just as Daniel finished cleaning up, there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find Mrs. Ramirez standing there, holding a plate of empanadas. "I thought you could use some breakfast," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Her sharp eyes immediately zeroed in on the kittens. "Oh, look at them! They're adorable," she cooed, setting the plate on the counter and crouching down to get a closer look. Daniel scratched the back of his head, feeling a bit overwhelmed. "Yeah, they're something, all right." Mrs. Ramirez picked up Daisy, cradling the tiny kitten in her hands. "You're such a softie, Danny. I never thought I'd see the day." "It's not like I planned this," he muttered. "I just couldn't leave them there." "Well, you did the right thing," Mrs. Ramirez said firmly. "But you're going to need help. Have you thought about taking them to a vet?" Daniel blinked. "A vet? No, I didn't even... Wait, do they need that?" "Of course they do. They need to be checked out, get their shots, and they'll need a proper diet soon. Formula won't cut it forever." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Great. More things to add to the list." Mrs. Ramirez patted his arm. "Don't worry. I'll help you find a good vet. And in the meantime, I'll keep an eye on them if you need a break." That afternoon, Daniel loaded the kittens into a small cardboard box for their trip to the vet. Smokey meowed loudly the entire time, while Pumpkin clawed at the edges of the box. Daisy and the black and white troublemaker, now nicknamed Patches, huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. The vet clinic was a small, welcoming space, with a cheerful receptionist and a faint smell of antiseptic. Daniel felt out of place as he approached the counter, holding the box awkwardly. "Hi, I need to get these kittens checked out," he said. The receptionist smiled warmly. "Of course. Do you have an appointment?" "No, I just found them yesterday," Daniel explained. "Well, you're in luck. Dr. Collins has a gap in her schedule. Just fill out these forms, and we'll get you in." Dr. Collins was a kind-looking woman in her mid-40s, with short brown hair and a calming presence. She examined each kitten carefully, her touch gentle and precise. "They're in surprisingly good health," she said, setting Pumpkin back in the box. "A little underweight, but that's to be expected. You're doing a great job with them so far." Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "That's good to hear." Dr. Collins glanced at him. "You're planning to keep them?" Daniel hesitated. "I mean, yeah, I guess. I don't really know what I'm doing, though." Dr. Collins smiled. "You're doing better than most. Just keep feeding them the formula for now, and in a couple of weeks you can start introducing wet food. I'll give you a schedule for their vaccinations and spaying or neutering when they're old enough." Daniel nodded, trying to absorb all the information. "Thanks, Doc. I appreciate it." Over the next few weeks, the kittens began to settle into their new home, and so did Daniel. His once quiet apartment was now filled with the sound of tiny paws skittering across the floor, playful meows, and the occasional crash as one of the kittens knocked something over. Patches was the ringleader of their mischief, always finding new ways to get into trouble. One afternoon, Daniel found him perched on the kitchen counter, pawing at a bag of chips. "How did you even get up there?" Daniel exclaimed, scooping the kitten up. Pumpkin, meanwhile, had a knack for stealing socks, dragging them around the apartment like trophies. Smokey was the most laid back, content to curl up in Daniel's lap while he worked. And Daisy, shy but curious, loved to follow him around, her tiny paws always just a step behind. As the days turned into weeks, Daniel found himself growing attached to the kittens. He started talking to them as if they could understand him, sharing his thoughts and frustrations. "You guys are ridiculous," he said one evening, watching as Patches and Pumpkin wrestled on the carpet. "But I guess I wouldn't have it any other way." Daniel's friends and neighbors began to take notice of his new companions. Mia stopped by frequently, bringing toys and treats for the kittens. "They've really grown on you, haven't they?" she teased one evening, watching as Daisy batted at a feather toy. "Yeah, well, they're hard to ignore," Daniel admitted, a small smile tugging at his lips. Even Mrs. Ramirez, who had initially been skeptical of Daniel's ability to care for the kittens, became a regular visitor. She often brought over homemade food for Daniel and treats for the kittens, insisting that he needed to take better care of himself too. "You're a good man, Danny," she said one evening as she watched Smokey doze in his lap. "These kittens are lucky to have you." Daniel looked down at the little gray ball of fur, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and affection. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but I think I'm the lucky one." A few months had passed since the kittens had come into Daniel's life. His once chaotic and bachelor-style apartment was slowly transforming into a cozy, pet-friendly home. The living room was now scattered with toys, scratching posts, and soft blankets. The walls, once bare, now bore a few photos of the kittens, their tiny faces frozen in moments of mischief or cuteness. Daniel sat on the couch one evening, watching as Pumpkin and Patches wrestled on the floor, while Smokey lounged on the windowsill, staring out at the world beyond. Daisy, true to her shy nature, nestled on Daniel's lap, purring softly. "All right, you little monsters," Daniel said, his voice filled with mock exasperation. "You've officially taken over my life." Daniel's days now revolved around the kittens. Mornings started early, with Patches pawing at his face or Pumpkin tugging at his blankets, demanding breakfast. Feeding time was a chaotic affair, with all four kittens meowing loudly as Daniel tried to fill their bowls. "You'd think I never feed you," he muttered one morning as Pumpkin nearly toppled her bowl in her eagerness. After breakfast, the kittens would race around the apartment, their energy seemingly endless. Daniel often found himself laughing at their antics, whether it was Smokey chasing a beam of sunlight or Patches trying and failing to jump onto the kitchen counter. His workdays were interrupted by their playful demands for attention. Smokey had a habit of curling up on his keyboard, and Daisy often sat on the back of his chair, watching him with wide, curious eyes. "You're worse than my boss," Daniel joked one day, gently moving Smokey off his laptop. Despite the interruptions, Daniel found that he didn't mind. The kittens brought a kind of joy and companionship he hadn't realized he was missing. One Saturday afternoon, Mia stopped by with a box of supplies. "I brought more toys," she announced as she walked in, setting the box on the floor. "You're spoiling them," Daniel said, though he couldn't hide his grin. "They deserve it," Mia replied, crouching down to pet Pumpkin. "And so do you. How are things going?" "Better," Daniel admitted. "They're a lot of work, but I can't imagine life without them now." Mia smiled. "I knew you'd get attached. You're a softie at heart." "Don't let anyone else hear you say that," Daniel joked. The two of them spent the afternoon playing with the kittens, laughing as Patches tried to wrestle a feather toy away from Smokey. "You're doing a great job with them," Mia said as she watched Daniel scoop Daisy into his arms. "They're happy, healthy, and loved." Daniel looked down at the tiny tortoiseshell kitten in his arms, her purring vibrating against his chest. "Yeah," he said softly, "I think they've done more for me than I've done for them." As the kittens grew older, Daniel started thinking about introducing them to the outside world. Smokey, in particular, seemed fascinated by the view from the window, his green eyes following the movements of birds and cars. One sunny afternoon, Daniel decided to take them out onto the apartment's small balcony. He set up a makeshift enclosure using a few old crates and blankets to keep them safe. The kittens were hesitant at first, their tiny noses twitching as they sniffed the fresh air. Daisy stayed close to Daniel, while Patches and Pumpkin immediately began exploring. Smokey, true to his curious nature, tried to climb the crate, his tail twitching with excitement. "Easy there, buddy," Daniel said, scooping him up before he could escape. Mia stopped by later that day and smiled at the sight of the kittens basking in the sun. "They're growing up so fast," she said, leaning against the railing. "Tell me about it," Daniel replied. "I'm not ready for them to become independent." "They'll always need you," Mia said, "even when they're grown." As the months turned into a year, the kittens grew from tiny, helpless creatures into sleek, energetic cats. Patches was still the troublemaker, always finding new ways to push boundaries. Pumpkin retained her playful, mischievous streak, while Smokey became the calm, wise leader of the group. Daisy, though still shy, had grown more confident, often curling up next to Daniel or nudging his hand for attention. Daniel's bond with each of them deepened. He found comfort in their presence, their purring a soothing backdrop to his days. They were his family now, filling his once empty apartment with life and love. Mrs. Ramirez became a regular visitor, often bringing treats for the cats. "Danny, you've really outdone yourself," she said one evening, as she watched Smokey curl up in her lap. "These cats adore you." "Yeah, well, they don't give me much of a choice," Daniel joked, though his smile betrayed his true feelings. Mrs. Ramirez patted his arm. "You've got a good heart, Danny. Don't forget that." One quiet evening, as the cats lounged around the living room, Daniel found himself thinking about the day he'd found them. The memory of their mother still haunted him sometimes, but he took comfort in knowing that her kittens were safe and loved. "I hope I'm doing right by you," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Smokey, as if sensing his thoughts, patted over and rested his head on Daniel's knee. "You guys really saved me. You know that?" Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of purring, a gentle reminder of how far they'd come. The years passed quickly, as they often do. What started as a chaotic and accidental rescue transformed into a steady and heartwarming routine. Daniel's 4 kittens had grown into healthy, confident adult cats, each with their distinct personality and quirks. His once quiet life was now rich with laughter, fur, and moments of pure joy. One crisp autumn morning, Daniel stood in his small kitchen, preparing breakfast. The sunlight streamed through the window, highlighting the subtle changes in his apartment. A cat tower now occupied one corner of the living room, covered in claw marks and fur. Toys littered the floor, evidence of a morning play session. Framed photos of the cats adorned the walls, capturing years of happy memories. Smokey, now the largest and calmest of the group, sat on the windowsill, his tail flicking lazily. Pumpkin lounged on the couch, while Patches was, as always, up to some mischief in the other room. Daisy, who had grown more independent over time but still had a soft spot for Daniel, sat at his feet, watching him intently. All right, breakfast is coming," Daniel said, laughing as Daisy let out an impatient meow. He placed bowls of food on the floor, stepping back as the cats gathered around. As they ate, Daniel sipped his coffee, watching them with a content smile. The morning routine was interrupted by a knock at the door. Daniel frowned, setting his mug down. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened the door, he found a young woman standing there, a hesitant smile on her face. "Hi," she said, holding out a small envelope. "Are you Daniel?" Yeah," he replied, taking the envelope. "What's this about?" "I'm Emily," she said. "I live in the neighborhood, and I think I might have known the cat you rescued a few years ago." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "The mother cat?" Emily nodded. "Yes, her name was Luna. She was a stray I used to feed. When she disappeared, I always wondered what happened to her. I heard about you from a neighbor, and I thought I'd reach out." Daniel's throat tightened. He glanced back at the cats, who had all paused their meal to watch the exchange. I'm sorry about Luna," he said softly. "I found her on the highway. She didn't make it, but her kittens." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the 4 cats. "They're alive, and they've been with me ever since." Emily's eyes filled with tears as she stepped inside. She crouched down, reaching out a hand toward Smokey, who cautiously approached her. "They're beautiful," she said, her voice trembling. She would have been so proud. Over coffee, Daniel and Emily exchanged stories about Luna. Emily talked about how Luna had appeared in her backyard one day, a skinny but determined stray with a knack for stealing scraps. "She was tough," Emily said, smiling through her tears. "But she had this gentle side, too. She loved sitting in the sun and watching the birds." Daniel shared his experience of finding the kittens, the overwhelming responsibility, and the unexpected joy they had brought into his life. "I never thought I'd be a cat person," he admitted, "but these 4, they changed everything." Emily began visiting regularly, bringing treats and toys for the cats. She and Daniel bonded over their shared love for the animals, and soon their friendship deepened. Emily's visits became the highlight of Daniel's week, and the cats took to her quickly, especially Daisy, who seemed to sense Emily's connection to her late mother. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching Patches and Pumpkin wrestle, Emily turned to Daniel. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For saving them, for giving them a home, and for letting me be part of their lives now." Daniel smiled. I think they saved me just as much as I saved them. On the anniversary of the day Daniel had found the kittens, Emily suggested a small celebration. They invited a few neighbors, including Mrs. Ramirez and Mia, who had been part of the journey from the start. The apartment was filled with laughter and warmth as the group reminisced about the past few years. Mrs. Ramirez brought her famous empanadas, and Mia surprised Daniel with a framed photo of him surrounded by the cats. You're officially a crazy cat dad now, Mia teased, handing him the photo. Daniel laughed. I'll take it as a compliment. As the evening wound down and the guests left, Daniel and Emily sat on the balcony, watching the city lights. Smokey lounged at their feet, his green eyes reflecting the soft glow of the streetlights. You've built something special here, Emily said, resting her head on Daniel's shoulder. I couldn't have done it without them, he replied, his voice full of gratitude. The cats, now a little older and a lot wiser, had become the heart of Daniel's home. They were more than just pets. They were family. And as he sat there, surrounded by the love and warmth they had brought into his life, Daniel realized he wouldn't change a thing. Months passed, and life had settled into a pleasant rhythm for Daniel, his 4 cats, and Emily. The bond between Daniel and Emily had grown stronger, and she had become an integral part of the cats' lives. Smokey, Pumpkin, Patches, and Daisy were thriving, their personalities shining brighter each day. But life, as it often does, threw an unexpected challenge their way. It started one quiet morning. Daniel was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when he noticed Daisy lying in her usual spot by the window. But something was different. She wasn't her usual alert and curious self. Her eyes were half closed, and her breathing seemed labored. Daisy! Daniel crouched beside her, his voice laced with concern. She barely lifted her head, letting out a weak meow. Daniel's heart sank. He quickly called Emily. Emily, something's wrong with Daisy. She's not acting like herself, he said, his voice trembling. I'll be right there, Emily replied. Within minutes, Emily arrived, and the two of them gently placed Daisy in a carrier and rushed to the nearest veterinary clinic. The waiting room was quiet, the only sounds the soft murmurs of other pet owners and the occasional bark or meow. Daniel sat with his head in his hands, the carrier resting on the seat beside him. Emily placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. She's in good hands now, Emily said softly. I should have noticed sooner, Daniel said, his voice heavy with guilt. I should have. Don't do that to yourself, Emily interrupted. You've done everything for her. She's lucky to have you. The vet, a kind-looking woman named Dr. Harper, finally called them into an exam room. After a thorough checkup and some tests, she delivered the news. Daisy has a respiratory infection, Dr. Harper said. It's not uncommon in cats, but she'll need medication and plenty of rest. You caught it early, which is good. Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. So, she's going to be okay? With the right care, yes, Dr. Harper assured him. The next few weeks were challenging. Daisy's medication schedule was strict, and Daniel stayed up late most nights to ensure she was comfortable. The other cats seemed to sense that something was wrong and stayed close to Daisy, often curling up beside her to keep her company. One evening, as Daniel sat on the floor next to Daisy's bed, gently stroking her fur, Emily arrived with a bag of groceries. Thought you could use a break, she said, setting the bag on the counter. Daniel smiled weakly. Thanks, but I can't really relax until she's better. Emily sat beside him, her hand brushing against his. You're doing everything right, Daniel. She knows you're here for her. Word about Daisy's illness spread through the neighborhood, and soon Daniel and Emily found themselves surrounded by support. Mrs. Ramirez stopped by daily with homemade meals, insisting that Daniel needed to eat properly to take care of the cats. Mia brought over new blankets and toys to keep Daisy comfortable. You've got a whole village behind you, Mia said one day as she handed Daniel a care package. I don't know what I'd do without all of you, Daniel replied, his voice thick with emotion. Slowly but surely, Daisy began to improve. Her appetite returned, and she started moving around the apartment again, though she was still weaker than usual. One evening, Daniel found her sitting by the window, watching the world outside. Hey, look who's back to her favorite spot, Daniel said, crouching beside her. Daisy turned her head to look at him, her green eyes bright and filled with trust. She let out a soft meow, and Daniel felt a wave of relief wash over him. As Daisy recovered, Daniel found himself reflecting on the journey they had all been through. "She's a fighter," he said to Emily one evening as they sat on the couch watching the cats play. "She takes after you," Emily replied, smiling. Daniel looked at her, surprised. "Me? You've been through so much, Daniel. Losing Luna, taking in the kittens, building this life for them. You never gave up. Daisy sees that. She knows she's safe with you." Daniel's throat tightened. He reached over and took Emily's hand. "Thank you," he said softly, "for everything." When Daisy was fully recovered, Daniel decided to celebrate. He invited his friends and neighbors over for a small gathering, complete with cat-friendly treats for the cats and snacks for the humans. As the evening went on, Daniel stood in the center of the room, watching his cats interact with their extended family. Smokey was perched on Mrs. Ramirez's lap. Patches was playing with Mia, and Pumpkin was curled up next to Emily. Daisy, still a little shy, stayed close to Daniel, her tail gently brushing against his leg. "To Daisy," Daniel said, raising a glass, "and to everyone who's been here for us. I couldn't have done it without you." The room erupted in cheers, and Daniel felt a deep sense of gratitude. As Daisy's recovery brought life back to normal, Daniel found himself reflecting on the journey he had taken with his 4 cats. He realized how deeply his life had changed since the fateful day he found them on the highway. Each challenge they faced together strengthened their bond and taught him the importance of resilience, love, and kindness. But he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more he could do. One rainy afternoon, Daniel sat by the window, sipping his coffee as Smokey dozed on his lap. Emily was seated nearby, working on her laptop, while Pumpkin and Patches were tangled in a playful scuffle on the rug. Daisy, now fully recovered, was perched on the windowsill, her tail swishing lazily as she watched the rain. "You know," Daniel said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence, "I've been thinking." Emily looked up from her screen, her brow raised. "About what?" "I want to do something more," Daniel replied. "Something bigger than just taking care of these 4. There are so many animals out there who don't get a second chance like they did." Emily tilted her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "What are you thinking?" "I want to start a rescue organization," Daniel said, his voice growing more confident as he spoke, "for stray and injured animals. I don't know how yet, but it feels like the right thing to do." Emily's smile widened. "I think that's an incredible idea." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of planning. Daniel researched everything he could about starting an animal rescue, from permits and funding to networking with local veterinarians and shelters. Emily was by his side every step of the way, offering her organizational skills and moral support. One evening, as they sat surrounded by papers and notes, Emily laughed. "I don't think I've seen you this excited about anything since the cats came into your life," she said. Daniel grinned. "That's because this is about them. They showed me how much of a difference one act of kindness can make. I want to pay that forward." Daniel knew he couldn't do this alone, so he reached out to his community. He was amazed by the response. Mrs. Ramirez offered to help spread the word, visiting neighbors and local businesses to share Daniel's vision. Mia volunteered her artistic talents to design flyers and a logo for the rescue. Dr. Harper, the vet who had treated Daisy, agreed to partner with Daniel, offering discounted services for the animals he would rescue. At their first official meeting, Daniel stood before the small group, his heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you all for being here," he said. "This dream wouldn't be possible without your support. Together, I think we can make a real difference." The rescue's first call came sooner than expected. A neighbor had found a litter of abandoned kittens in an alleyway, their tiny cries echoing through the night. Daniel and Emily rushed to the scene, armed with blankets, a carrier, and a flashlight. When they arrived, they found the kittens huddled together, shivering and covered in dirt. "Poor little things," Emily murmured, carefully lifting one into her arms. Daniel gently scooped up the others, his heart aching for their plight. "We'll take care of them," he said firmly. Back at Daniel's apartment, the kittens were bathed, fed, and given a warm place to sleep. Smokey, Pumpkin, Patches, and Daisy watched curiously from a distance, as if understanding that these newcomers needed special care. As word of Daniel's rescue efforts spread, more and more animals found their way to his care. Each one had a story, some heartbreaking, others inspiring, and Daniel poured his heart into giving them a second chance. One evening, as he and Emily sat on the couch surrounded by cats and kittens, Daniel turned to her with a smile. "Can you believe this all started with Luna?" he said. Emily nodded, her eyes misty. "She'd be proud of you, Daniel, of everything you've done." The rescue quickly became a beacon of hope in the neighborhood. Volunteers flocked to help, donations poured in, and local schools invited Daniel to speak about the importance of animal welfare. One sunny afternoon, as Daniel stood outside the small building that now served as the rescue's headquarters, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Smokey, Pumpkin, Patches, and Daisy were with him, their presence a reminder of how far they had come together. "Ready for the next chapter?" Emily asked, standing beside him. Daniel nodded. "More than ever." Over the next year, Daniel's rescue, now named Luna's Haven, grew beyond his wildest expectations. What had begun as a heartfelt decision to care for 4 orphaned kittens evolved into a full-fledged sanctuary for stray and injured animals. Daniel's apartment, which once housed only his cats, was no longer enough to support the influx of animals. After months of fundraising and generous community support, he was able to secure a small building on the edge of town. Luna's Haven became a sanctuary of hope and second chances. The building wasn't much when Daniel first saw it. The walls were cracked and the roof needed repairs, but he saw the potential. Emily stood beside him, her arms crossed as she surveyed the space. "It's rustic," she said, laughing. Daniel grinned. "It has character. Besides, it's what's inside that matters, right?" With help from volunteers, the space was transformed. Each room had a purpose: a cozy kitten nursery, a medical area for injured animals, and a large playroom where the cats could roam freely. Murals of cats and dogs painted by Mia adorned the walls, giving the place warmth and life. The sanctuary's first resident was a scruffy stray dog named Max. He had been found wandering the streets, his ribs visible under his matted fur. "Are you sure about this?" Emily asked as Daniel gently lifted Max into his arms. "Absolutely," Daniel replied. "This place is for all animals in need, not just cats." Max's transformation became a symbol of hope. Over weeks of care, his fur grew back, and his playful personality emerged. When a young couple adopted him, Daniel realized that his mission was bigger than just providing a safe space. It was about creating families. Not every day was easy. The sanctuary faced hurdles, from financial struggles to heartbreaking cases. One afternoon, a volunteer named Sarah arrived with a box of abandoned kittens. They were tiny, their eyes barely open, and their frail bodies shivered despite the blankets. "These were left in a dumpster," Sarah said, her voice trembling with anger. "How can people be so cruel?" Daniel's chest tightened as he gently lifted one of the kittens. "We'll give them a fighting chance," he said, his voice steady. Caring for the kittens required round-the-clock attention. Daniel and Emily took turns feeding them every few hours, their exhaustion outweighed by their determination to see the kittens thrive. One of the kittens, a runt named Willow, stole everyone's heart. Despite her small size, she was feisty and determined, reminding Daniel of Daisy when she was young. The sanctuary brought together a diverse group of people united by their love for animals. Jake, a retired firefighter, became the handyman, fixing everything from leaking pipes to broken fences. His gruff exterior masked a soft heart, especially when it came to the animals. Sophie, a high school student, volunteered after school, often staying late to cuddle the animals and help with cleaning. She dreamed of becoming a veterinarian and looked up to Daniel as a mentor. Dr. Harper, the vet who had once treated Daisy, became the sanctuary's official veterinarian. Her calm demeanor and expertise were invaluable during emergencies. The camaraderie among the volunteers created a sense of family, with Luna's Haven at the center. One of the most emotional moments came when an older woman named Margaret visited the sanctuary. She had recently lost her beloved cat and was hesitant about adopting another. "I'm not sure I have the energy for a young one," Margaret admitted, her hands trembling as she looked at the cats. Daniel introduced her to Willow, the feisty kitten who had grown stronger under their care. Willow immediately climbed into Margaret's lap, purring loudly. "She's a handful," Daniel warned with a smile. Margaret laughed, tears shining in her eyes. "I think she's exactly what I need." Watching Margaret and Willow leave together, Daniel felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Luna's Haven became more than a rescue. It became a cornerstone of the community. Schools organized field trips to teach children about animal care, and local businesses partnered with the sanctuary for fundraising events. At one such event, a festival held in the park, Daniel found himself surrounded by familiar faces. Mrs. Ramirez was manning the bake sale, Mia was painting faces, and Jake was running a booth where kids could build cat toys. Emily walked up to Daniel, her smile radiant. "Look around," she said. "This is because of you." Daniel shook his head. "It's because of all of us. Luna's Haven isn't just mine. It's theirs too." That night, as Daniel sat on the floor of the sanctuary's playroom surrounded by Smokey, Pumpkin, Patches, and Daisy, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "You four started it all," he said, his voice soft. "Everything I've built, everything we've done, it's because of you." Daisy nuzzled his hand, as if understanding his words. Emily entered the room carrying 2 mugs of tea. "You're thinking about Luna, aren't you?" she asked, sitting beside him. Daniel nodded. "I think about her every day. I hope she knows how much of an impact she had." Emily placed a hand on his arm. "She'd be proud of you, Daniel, of everything you've done." It was a bright spring morning, and the sanctuary was alive with activity. Birds chirped outside, and the smell of freshly bloomed flowers wafted through the open windows. Luna's Haven was bustling, as it always was, with volunteers cleaning, playing with animals, and preparing for another adoption event. Daniel stood in the playroom, watching as a group of kittens tumbled over each other in a burst of energy. Smokey, Pumpkin, Patches, and Daisy sat nearby, their presence a calming reminder of how it all began. The day took a turn when Daniel received a call from a young woman named Claire. She sounded frantic. "I just found a mother cat and her kittens by the side of the road," she explained. "The mother's, she didn't make it, but the kittens are alive. I don't know what to do." Daniel felt his heart tighten. It was a scenario painfully close to the one that had brought his 4 cats into his life. "Bring them here," he said without hesitation. When Claire arrived, her face was pale, and her hands trembled as she handed over a small cardboard box. Inside were 3 tiny kittens, their eyes barely open, mewling softly for their mother. Daniel gently lifted one of the kittens, his voice soft. "It's okay, little one. You're safe now." That evening, as Daniel and Emily worked to feed and warm the kittens, memories of the past flooded his mind. He could still see Luna lying lifeless on the highway, her 4 kittens huddled around her. Emily noticed the distant look in his eyes. "You're thinking about Luna, aren't you?" she asked gently. Daniel nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "It's like it's happening all over again. But this time, I can do more." Emily placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "You've already done so much, Daniel. You gave her kittens a chance at life, and now you're doing the same for these little ones." As the weeks passed, the kittens grew stronger under Daniel's care. One of them, a little gray tabby with wide, curious eyes, reminded him of Luna. "I think we should name her Hope," Emily suggested one evening as they watched the kittens play. "Hope," Daniel repeated, a smile tugging at his lips. "I like that." Hope had a mischievous streak, constantly climbing onto shelves and knocking over anything in her path. But she also had a gentleness that endeared her to everyone. The sanctuary's adoption event arrived, and families poured in, eager to meet the animals. Daniel watched with pride as one by one, cats and dogs found their forever homes. Hope and her siblings were among the last to be adopted. A young couple with a little girl stopped in front of their pen, the child's face lighting up as Hope batted at her fingers through the bars. "Can we take her home, Mommy?" the girl pleaded. The mother smiled, glancing at Daniel. "She's perfect." Daniel knelt down to the little girl's level. "Her name is Hope," he said. "She's a special one." As he handed Hope over to the family, Daniel felt a bittersweet pang in his chest. Letting go was never easy, but it was moments like this that made everything worth it. That evening, after the event had ended and the sanctuary was quiet, Daniel sat outside with Emily. The stars sparkled above them, and the air was filled with the soft chirping of crickets. "I never thought my life would turn out like this," Daniel said, his voice filled with wonder. "All of this, it started with Luna. She changed everything. Emily leaned against him, her gaze fixed on the stars. And now you're changing the lives of so many animals. Luna's legacy lives on, Daniel. Through you, through the sanctuary, and through every life you've touched. As Daniel sat there, surrounded by the quiet hum of the sanctuary, he thought of Luna. In his mind, he could see her walking alongside him, her tail held high, proud of what he had built. "Thank you," he whispered into the night, a tear slipping down his cheek. The journey that had begun with loss and heartbreak had come full circle. Luna's haven was more than a rescue. It was a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the profound impact one life could have on so many others. Hope you enjoyed this story. If you want more stories like this, let us know in comments section.